is helping us out with all of our tech needs today. He's going to be helping with the slideshow and monitoring the chat for us. So thank you, Chris. Okay, so next slide, please. And I'm excited to introduce our first presenter today. So Amanda Churchill, she's the Adolescent Policy and Practice Specialist for DCF, or the Department of Children and Families Family Services Division. She manages DCF's extended care services, contracted programming for adolescents and youth involved with DCF, or those who are at risk for systems involvement. And she also provides support to the DCF field working with older youth. Amanda's been working with or in support of Vermont youth for nearly 20 years. Thank you for joining us, Amanda.
Thanks so much for having me. I want to start this conversation by grounding us in a little bit of data. I can share that there are currently about 315 youth over the age of 14 that are in DCF custody. The average estimated length of stay for all children and youth in custody is about 12 months in Vermont. Many older youth in care will exit before they turn 18. But last year, 70 youth aged out of foster care in Vermont. From the national data, we know that youth with foster care experience tend to enroll, earn credits, and complete post-secondary education at much lower rates than their non-foster care peers. Some studies suggest that between 3 and 9% of former foster youth earn a 4-year degree. Additional youth enroll, but dropout rates, especially in the first year, are quite high. Our Vermont data and our experience with this population appear to mirror the national trends. So there are a lot of barriers to higher education for former foster youth, but there are also several factors, resources, and strategies that we can focus on to support youth with foster care experience to be successful. To get started, first factors, and this is the next slide, or if somebody's moving the slides for me. Okay, all right, so I'm going to jump in now to factors for educational success on the next slide. So first and foremost is around aspiration and relational support. So research shows that the single most important factor that determines a youth's success is a connection to at least one caring, supportive adult. Our main task needs to be helping youth to build and maintain relationships, as this will be a key factor for them throughout their educational career and well into adulthood. Youth need support from others for years to prepare for and persist with higher education. We also know that the most important factors impacting a young person's decision to continue their education is whether they are familiar with others, especially parents and other extended family that have gone to college or training. So for many youth that have experienced foster care, there may not be a strong reference group in this area. So for these folks, we may need to look more broadly for role models and guides. Many youth are going to also receive a lot of misinformation about whether they are college material and about the financial aspects of higher education. So youth and their caregivers, their support teams need to be aware of what resources are available, especially those that are specifically for youth with foster care experience. It's crucial that youth receive a wide range of information about their choices and have mentors throughout the process. Next, academic preparation. Some youth may enter post-secondary ed with some educational gaps. Research has shown that every time a child changes schools, they can lose up to 6 months of educational attainment. Youth that experience foster care often change schools more than other kids, and this can put them behind in their skills. Some youth may need remedial or college prep classes, some of which may be non-credit bearing, and this really needs to be supported and normalized. It can also be really beneficial for youth to access tutoring and skill building support, and specifically the higher a student's reading skills, the more prepared a youth will be for college level academics. Funding and financial counseling. Youth that experience foster care after age 13 qualify for independent student status. This means that they don't include the income of any parents or caregivers on their financial aid applications. Because of this, youth are usually eligible for the maximum amount of financial aid. But because of this, youth are also, this means they have greater access to student loan debt. And often due to inexperience with independence and with managing money and experiences of poverty and instability, youth may be tempted to take out more student loans than they need to cover their education and living expenses. So we need to ensure that youth really understand the risk and the long-term burden of student loans. Instead, youth should be supported to access all available gift aid and to access the other services that we're going to talk about here today. Youth also should know that they'll be financially obligated for their education expenses, whether they pass or fail, finish or drop out. If youth aren't successful, a lot of financial aid is no longer going to apply, and youth are left with a big debt to an educational institution. This can become a big barrier for youth that when they want to go back to school, when they're more stable and more prepared. And so youth just need to be aware of this in advance. Youth also need support in choosing the right academic program or school. A lot of youth dream of leaving the state to explore and get to know other parts of the world, but there may also be a lot of benefits to staying in Vermont for youth. So for example, our youth development program, the extended care services that are available, important relationships they may have, and also health insurance. The federal Chafee program, which supports YDP, exists in all parts of the country, but in my experience, Vermont tends to offer more robust services than a lot of other states. Local education options can also keep both education and education-related costs, such as housing, down. I encourage youth to apply widely and aim high, but also to apply in state and to make choices after comparing award letters, visiting campuses, and exploring the local services that may be available. A little bit on resources. Aspiration enrollment are really just the beginning. Many youth are going to need substantial support to be successful. So all youth, but especially former foster youth, benefit from advising, tutoring, financial aid, basic needs support, healthcare, childcare, social and leadership opportunities, and also just general check-ins. The college years are a time when the work of adolescent brain development is still very much at play, which is going to affect youth's behavior, emotions, mental health, risk-taking, and some youth are going to have some behavioral and mental health needs related to past trauma. So we can help youth by ensuring that they're connected to the qualified service providers in the area, and this can make a big difference in their success. I did just want to mention also internships, part-time work, and also work study. We sometimes overlook this for youth that are new to college, but we believe it's important to ground education goals in the work world, and also work can be a really important source of social connection. So if you think about your own life and how many of your close relationships were born at work, I know for me that this has often been the case. If youth plan to live on campus, they need to be supported to think ahead for dorm closures. This is a conversation that should be happening well before school starts and then ongoing. Ideally, youth can rely on social supports and their personal networks for occasional housing needs, but this can be a real challenge for many youth and can lead to them leaving college early, unfortunately. Lastly, on this slide, I just want to emphasize that we need to navigate with youth and not for youth, the skills they learn along their educational path, like applying for applying for and accessing school, securing housing, identifying services, advocating for themselves. These are going to be applicable skills many times over for youth in lots of different ways for their entire lives. All right, next slide. Financial resources and services. First and foremost, the Youth Development Program and Extended Care. Jen Boardman is going to talk a lot more about this next, but YDP is Vermont's primary service for youth with foster care experience. If you're working with youth that are not referred to YDP, this is an important first step, as this program will help youth to access other important services, including financial support and housing. Jumping around a little bit, I want to mention VSAC. VSAC is an amazing partner for DCF and for youth that have experienced foster care. Their outreach counselors support youth to prepare and explore, apply and fund and persist in their educational path. VSAC has created specific marketing materials for youth in foster care, and their website even includes a pathway specifically for this population. All of which I'm sure Liam will talk a lot more about, but I also just want to mention VSAC and DCF have an MOU that allows DCF to share some basic information with VSAC about teens in custody, and VSAC reaches out to those youth in their schools and works with them to engage them in college prep services, which is just awesome. Sorry, I just got a note that I'm difficult to hear. I'll try and talk a little bit louder. But let me know if you can't hear me. In terms of financial aid and independent student status, again, this is a huge resource for youth, but if they were in foster care after age 13, they should indicate so on the FAFSA. Liam's going to talk about 2 VSAC administered scholarships specifically for youth in foster care. The Chafee ETV Scholarship and the Emily Lester Scholarship, which was actually advocated for by a former Vermont foster youth. There's also another scholarship that's supported by the Vermont Foster and Adoptive Families Association, also known as the VFAFA Scholarship. And you can ask DCF or YDP about how to apply for those funds. Lastly, on this slide, resource guide for emerging adults. DCF recently compiled a handy resource guide for folks working with older youth. I will upload this document to the chat here in a minute, but the guide includes a lot of statewide resources and also services that are region specific in the areas of financial support, childcare, housing, health and mental health, employment, and more. Just a couple of resources from the guide to highlight. Vermont 211, the statewide database, has a lot of information about programs and services available to Vermonters, and this is a great place to start if you're trying to help youth to meet specific needs. Also, the State Department of Disabilities, Aging and Independent Living, also known as DAIL, identifies one designated agency, also known as a DA, in each region of the state as responsible for ensuring that the needed services are available within the area. So these agencies are also excellent partners in helping to identify appropriate services for youth, especially any developmental, mental health, or substance use services. And then the guide also includes several short-term and transitional housing resources identified in the guide. Okay, all right, next slide, please. So getting to the strategies, a recently published study called Barriers to Degree Completion for College Students with Foster Care Histories reviewed characteristics of former foster youth with college experience. The research showed that these youth were less than half as likely to earn a degree than low-income and first-generation students. The study identified a number of barriers that we are in a position to help them out with. First, social support. Youth with greater amounts of perceived social support prior to entering higher ed are more likely to complete their educational goals. Time and a personal connection are the things that we consistently hear from youth that they need from adults in their lives. I just want to encourage folks to connect with youth in ways that work for them. Let them express their preference and the platform if possible, whether it's in person or FaceTime, Zoom, text, phone, etc. And also, I just want to say, like, don't be afraid to ask about their feelings. Take time to just listen and trust your gut in terms of what you're hearing and what youth may need. And again, like, the most important piece of work we can probably do for youth, especially now, but really always, is just to connect with them often and help them connect with others. In terms of campus-based supports and individualized services, another thing that we can do is try to help youth to explore and select an education setting or path that's well matched to them, both in terms of how competitive the college is and how cohesive and supportive the college culture is. Researchers suggest that if the culture of the college and its student body aligns with a student's own background, this can create a sense of belongingness and comfort that's not present when there's a mismatch between an education setting and the youth's own background. And then, again, ensure youth are connected to the youth development program. YDP can work with youth for years and help get youth connected to other appropriate services. Youth are going to need a range of academic, financial, social, health, and logistical supports tailored to the needs of youth that may have experienced trauma. And a lot of schools have programs such as TRIO programming that support youth that may be dealing with extra barriers. My suggestion is to include the institution in helping identify the right supports and services for youth. Lastly, around mitigating financial hardships, youth that avoid having to work full-time to meet their expenses, while also having the support to manage financial bumps in the road, are more successful with their education. Financial hardships that are not related to tuition are a big factor in derailing youth education goals. We need to ensure that youth can meet their very basic needs with access to healthy food, housing, clothing, internet and safety, childcare, and more. And then to wrap up, again, we just need to support and build up the hopes and dreams of youth that have experienced foster care. We need to ensure that youth with foster care experience know that higher education can be a reality and that there are resources specifically for this population. We need to make sure they are supported to select an educational path that's right for them, and that they know all about local and campus supports and financial resources. So that's it for me. Next, I will turn it over to Jen Boardman from the Youth Development Program to talk more about guidance for working with that population of youth.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was wonderful. And so I just want to take a moment to introduce Jennifer. So Jennifer works for the Washington County Youth Services Bureau, and she's also the statewide director for the Youth Development Program. In her role, she oversees youth development coordinators across the state who are helping youth with foster care experience navigate adolescence and young adulthood. Jennifer's passionate about looking at the macro level issues impacting youth and working towards system change in order to provide more opportunities for them to thrive. So thank you so much for joining us, Jennifer.
Thank you, Susie. I'm so happy to be here with all of you to talk more about YDP. We can move on to the next slide, please. So before I get into the details about our program, I first want to talk about how we work with DCF and our partner agencies across the state. So the Department for Children and Families contracts with the Washington County Youth Service Bureau, where I work, to provide the statewide administration for YDP. And then we at the Youth Service Bureau subcontract with all these different agencies you see on your screen here. And so these are the agencies that are hiring the youth development coordinators or our YDP case managers and providing the direct services in local communities. And I want to show you how you can find your local youth development coordinator. And so I'm going to ask Chris to navigate to our website, which is vtyouthdevelopmentprogram.org. Thank you, Chris. And so up at the top, you'll see a button that says Find Your Local YDP. And when you click that, you'll see this list of all the different districts, the agencies we work with, and all of our amazing youth development coordinators. So if you're hoping to find your local YDC, this is where you can do that. Down the bottom of this page, you'll also find our statewide team contact information. And I encourage you to reach out directly to me if you have any general program questions, want to make a referral, or need to contact your local YDC. And one more thing on the website here, Chris, if you look at the top right corner, you'll see a link that says Community Resources. When you click on that, you'll see the first downloadable resource there is our referral. So if you are working with a youth with foster care experience who has yet to be referred to YDP, you're welcome to fill out our referral and send that along to get that youth connected. All right, thank you, Chris. We can go back to our slideshow. And we can move on to the next slide. So let's talk more about YDP. So YDP works with youth 14 to 23 years old who have experience in the foster care system. And we work with about 500 youth every year. We have 16 youth development coordinators, or YDCs, located across the state of Vermont, offering youth-centered, strengths-based case management services to youth. And their primary goal is to partner with youth, stand beside them as they set goals for their future and their transition into adulthood, and also to help those youth uncover their unique skills, strengths, and assets. Case managers, or YDCs, also have flexible funding to leverage for youth to help them achieve those goals. And the sky is kind of the limit when it comes to this funding. So we're able to fund things like summer camps, cell phone service, horseback riding lessons, or driver's ed. Specifically for higher ed, we can pay for textbooks, some tuition, housing expenses like rental subsidies or security deposits, clothing for school, or work study opportunities. So again, a lot of flexibility with this funding, and that's a great asset that we're able to offer youth in our program. In addition to the case management and the funding, YDP helps to facilitate extended foster care agreements. And so there's a lot to these agreements, so I'm really gonna gloss over those details and just give you a broad sense for what these are. So in partnership with DCF, YDP is able to provide financial support to former foster parents and other supportive adults to care for youth beyond the age of 18. So for youth 18 to 23 years old who are living with former foster parents or other supportive adults, we're able to give those supportive adults a monthly stipend to offset room and board costs. And these agreements can be leveraged for youth in higher ed situations. So even when a youth is living on a college campus, they may be able to enter this kind of agreement. And that can be really huge to help them maintain stable housing over school breaks during the summer, or if a global pandemic hits and they need to go home. It's really important that youth have that home base. And this is one way we're able to help them achieve that. Finally, here at YDP, we strongly believe that youth voice matters. So we offer a number of youth leadership and advocacy opportunities to youth. And through those opportunities, like our youth advisory board and training up DCF workers and foster parents, we really aim to elevate youth's voices and provide opportunities for them to impact the child welfare system and beyond. We want to help youth build up their leadership and self-advocacy skills. And we know that self-advocacy doesn't always come naturally to all of us. And this is an especially important skill for college students, as you all know. We can't assume that youth already know how to advocate for themselves. And so we really need to build up that skill, and YDP can definitely help with that. we can move on to the next slide here. So this was I want to say a bit about our YDP mission statement and our value statement as well. So it's our mission at YDP to ensure that youth with foster care experience enter adulthood with the necessary support to build productive and fulfilling lives. As Amanda mentioned earlier, we know that youth who have experienced foster care are at higher risk for adverse outcomes like homelessness, unemployment, lower educational attainment. And so it's our job at YDP to make sure that youth exiting the foster care system here in Vermont have the opportunities to rise above those risk factors, find their resilience, and not only survive, but thrive. Next slide, please. So this was an extremely brief overview of YDP. So if you want to learn more about the services we offer, I really do encourage you to reach out directly to me. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have and also connect you to your local youth development coordinator. And so next I'm going to turn things over to two of our amazing youth development coordinators, Alicia and Sarah. And they're going to walk you through some examples of how YDP involved youth have worked to achieve their higher ed goals. And they're going to dig deeper into some of the challenges that students face, especially youth in this population. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jennifer. And so just a little bit more about our next two speakers, Alicia Cerosali. She's been in her role as a youth development coordinator for 3 years at Spectrum Youth and Family Services. Prior to this role, Alicia was an AmeriCorps member with the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And she's looking forward to cooking, baking, and soaking in the sunshine this fall. I think I'm doing the same, definitely. So thanks for joining us, Alicia. And also joining us is Sarah Croitoru. She's the Youth Development Coordinator working with Youth Services, which is based in Brattleboro, which is where I am as well. So I'm so excited Sarah's joining us today. Sarah has been in her role for 3 years, but she's been at Youth Services for 5. Sarah's work in this field is really well regarded. She's both a leader and a fierce advocate for teens and young adults. So thank you both, Sarah and Alicia. Take it away.
It'd be helpful if I unmuted. Hello, I'm Sarah, and as Susie just said, I'm the Youth Development Coordinator for Windham County. So I work with youth who are in Windham County and are either actively in foster care or have been in foster care in the past. But I also have youth who I am working with and serve in Franklin County, Massachusetts, and Cheshire County, New Hampshire. And those youth were in Vermont DCF custody prior to moving out of state.
And yeah, I'm Alicia Cerosali. I am one of 2 youth development coordinators in the Burlington district at Spectrum Youth and Family Services. I serve youth who are in Burlington and the surrounding towns, as well as a couple of youth who also live out of state due to their higher education.
If you could go to the next slide, please. So young people, whether they've been in foster care or not, need a lot of support to attend college successfully. And it tends to be particularly true, as you've already heard, for young people who have been in foster care. The most pressing issues that I see as a youth development coordinator for youth attending college include housing, mental health support, food security, connections and support, finances, and transportation. Many of these needs are basic human needs, but for youth who have been in foster care, there's often a larger need for support in these areas because of a lack of familial support for housing or financial support. Developmentally, it's also super important that people at this age range have somewhere to go where they feel safe to go and turn for questions and case management provided by the Youth Development Program, as well as connections through VSAC and other community partners can provide that support. So one example of a youth who I've worked with who's attended school and is actively attending school is someone who when they graduated high school, they took some time off to figure out what they wanted to do, and they then got a job through the Department of Labor and their summer employment program. And after they completed that program, they were able to connect with VSAC, the Department of Labor, and a local organization to do a specific training program to work at that organization. And VSAC funded some course material that was actually done at the Community College of Vermont for the training purposes of getting that employment. And that young person began working for that employer, and they continued on with VSAC and the community college to start taking classes in accounting. They now are more than halfway through their associates in accounting, and at their employer where they had been working as janitorial staff, they're now working in the billing department. And so they have a career in the field that they're going to school for, while also still attending school full time, getting support financially from the Youth Development Program and VSAC in order to pay for schooling. That young person also is in one of our extended foster care agreements, so they are living with their former foster parent, which is helping cover the housing costs in order for them to be successful while going to school. This is a pretty unique case. It's not all that often that we get a youth where all of those pieces come together, but when they do, that's really amazing. And then I'll give Alicia a chance to talk about.
Well, I think we can move on to the next slide so that we can kind of dissect some of these different areas.
Great. So housing support is really important for youth because youth who are attending college and have been in foster care, because if they don't have housing, then school is really not a possibility for them. And even if they're in school, if they lose their housing, that can be a major problem, because then all their focus goes away from school and onto housing, and then they may not do so well with their classes, which, as Amanda was talking about, they can rack up debt even for classes they didn't pass. So those are major issues. So ways that we provide support, and that support should be provided, is advocacy to stay on campus during breaks. Some colleges will allow that for youth who have been in foster care and don't have somewhere to go. Also, housing case management can be provided through YDP, but also through the Coordinated Entry Lead Agency, who can help point in each district to the different organizations that provide housing support for young adults. So Coordinated Entry is a HUD mandated process that puts all people who are housing unstable or homeless on one list for housing supports. And that's the Coordinated Entry lead, even if a youth doesn't need to be on the list, is a good place to go for housing support.
Yeah, and I think that this is a really key area that ties back to the things that Amanda was talking about connectedness to adults, because if a youth doesn't feel connected to an adult, it's pretty challenging to find a solution when a youth needs somewhere to stay over a break. So in YDP, that's something that we are working on pretty consistently to kind of explore different connections and permanency with our youth. I had a youth who was really struggling to identify someone that they could stay with over the break. The pandemic hit, so things kind of accelerated in that process of needing to find someone, she ended up reaching out to her previous guardian ad litem, who was like more than willing to take her in and such an enormous support to her. So she ended up living with this person over the course of the summer on one of our extended care agreements. She got a job, she got her passport, she's working on getting her license. She was able to engage in really incredible enrichment activities as well. So, and then that adult is also able to provide her with support while she's transitioning back to campus. So we're keeping the extended care agreement open through that transition. So the adult is still getting financial support and compensation for supporting this youth. But that's just, I think, a really good example of how some of these agreements can come to be and how important they are in supporting our youth.
I think it's also important to just mention that COVID obviously made this a lot more complicated because a lot of youth were sent home from on-campus housing and they're not able to stay due to the pandemic. And so that is a big influence and a big thing to be thinking about right now in regards to housing. So if we can go to the next slide. So another piece that's really important for youth is mental health support. That is really important because when mental health can impact the ability to be successful at school. So there are each district has a designated agency who can provide mental health support. There's therapy, which can happen on campus or not. A lot of campus counseling centers have group therapy. Psychiatric support is a lot harder for most people in Vermont, I think, just because there aren't enough psychiatrists. However, the designated agencies do sometimes have psychiatrists. There are private psychiatrists, and sometimes primary care providers are willing to help provide psychiatric support, specifically while a youth is looking for a psychiatrist. So that's always an option to look into if a young person comes to you and says, I really need help and I don't have a psychiatrist, but I need help managing my meds. The other piece that's really important is that youth who turn 18 while in foster care are eligible for Vermont Medicaid until they turn 26, regardless of their income. So in order to get support to get Medicaid, I always help youth get connected with our local hospital because there's the community resource liaison who helps with Medicaid applications, and that is one of the main pieces of her job. And so she has expertise in Medicaid applications, which I do not have, and I don't really want to have just because there's too many other things in my head. So there's also healthcare navigators. It's also important to know that every year youth need to renew their Medicaid. So once they turn 18, they have to reapply every single year in order to keep it active. Do you have anything to add, Alicia? Or next?
I can just speak to the designated mental health agency in Burlington would be the Howard Center. I myself tend to refer quite a bit to Riverstone as well, Riverstone Counseling, because it's Spectrum's counseling program. And I guess a positive of the pandemic is that telehealth has become more accessible. So all of our counselors at Riverstone are able to support anyone who's within the state of Vermont. Yeah, and Sarah and I were just talking yesterday about how hard college can be, regardless of who you are and where you're coming from. It can be really taxing on your mental health. So we're especially mindful of the additional barriers that our youth are facing and how that will likely impact their mental health. So we want to make sure that they're very connected to not only supportive adults and peers, but mental health practitioners that can support their mental health needs.
Okay, Next
I just
slide.
want to chime in for just a second to note that it's 11:42. I'm sorry, 10:42, not 11:42. So for the folks who are watching the presentation and listening, we may not have time at the end to get to everybody's questions, but just a reminder, as you're thinking of them, pop them in the chat, because if we can't answer them today, we will know your questions and we will send out a document with some answers and follow-up for you all. So don't be shy to ask your questions. All right, I'll pass it back to you guys.
So for finances for college, the youth development program can provide support, as Jen talked about, and that is for a wide range of things, including housing, including textbooks, so specifically education related things, including things like car registration to help with transportation to college, or a bus pass. VSAC is a huge partner. I always refer my youth to VSAC. That's true whether or not youth are going to secondary ed programs, college, or to non-degree programs, training programs like becoming an LNA, or even driver's education. And then also employment support is really important because it can help youth to determine what type of training or education they might be interested in, and also provides connections and more money for extra things. So even if it's part-time working 10 hours a week, maybe that's the money that they have to spend on some more normalcy or enrichment type items. And the Department of Labor, Voc Rehab, and the Jobs program are the main programs that I collaborate with. The Jobs program, at least in Windham County, is under our designated agency, and it's case management. It stands for Jump on Board for Success, and it has to have an employment focused goal, so they can do case management for other things as well. It's also important to note that while Amanda named that it can be harder for youth if they go out of state, I have a young person who aged out of foster care in Vermont, is now a resident in Franklin County, Massachusetts, and is in school there. And I was able to connect them with the people who do the federal training vouchers for youth who have been in foster care, so that he can still get that financial support, but through the state where he is now a resident. So Alicia, I don't know if you have anything to add, but if not, then I think we'll pass it over to Liam.
I think the one last note that I have around finances is that it doesn't hurt to ask. Like, that's what I always tell my youth is writing a letter to financial aid saying, I want to go here so badly, but I can't afford it, is something that I always tell my youth to do. I did it when I was in college and was generally granted an additional like $1,000 in some type of scholarship. So that's something that I always tell my youth to do. It does not hurt to ask. I also had someone struggling with food security last semester, and I wrote a letter with him to see if there was any option for support with food, and UVM was able to give him, I think, 10 swipes into the cafeteria. So yeah, I guess that's my last piece of advice, is writing letters and asking doesn't hurt.
Great, thank you so much, Alicia and Sarah. That was some awesome information. We're going to go on to the next slide now, and I'm so excited to introduce Liam Danaher. And Liam works with us here at VSAC. He's been working with us for 10 years. He serves low-income, first-generation, and other marginalized populations across the state, with a real focus on helping people access all different types of higher education. Liam holds a dual Bachelor of Arts from St. Michael's College in Political Science and American Studies, along with his master's degree in Higher Education and Student Affairs Administration from the University of Vermont. The intersection of foster youth and higher education were a focal point of his graduate study, and service to this population is both a personal and professional passion for Liam. So thank you, Liam. I'd just like to note we have just about 12 minutes left, so I hate to put you under the gun, but please share your information. We're so excited to hear from you.
I like a little pressure. That's where you get
Oh,
diamonds.
good.
So, all good. Hi, everyone. For those of you who have never been on a Zoom panel, you can't tell how many people are watching. So to those of you out there who I can't see and have no sense of how many of you there are, it's great to be in community with you all this morning, even virtual. We all have a handful of things in common, and my take is service to Vermonters and beyond is one of those things. So I'm flattered to be on this panel with such talented and passionate folks, and I'm happy to be I'm just happy to be here with you all. I have no slides for you. I have links, which I'm going to share. I'm taking a different approach. I have links, which I'm going to share in the chat. But I'm going to sort of run through some information. And if you have specific questions tied to anything I say or anything anyone else who's spoken has said, please don't hesitate to shoot them into the chat, either specifically to the individual or to the entire chat. First off, the most important thing I want to share with you all, because when I attend a webinar or something, I want links, I want resources. So if you have never been to the VSAC website, now is as good a time as ever. We have resources relevant to every population in Vermont who could be seeking really to take their education and career path in a new and different direction. Fundamentally at VSAC, we are an organization devoted to financial literacy, empowerment, and higher education, and specifically the intersection of those three things. Every employee at VSAC, many of you know one or two, but every employee at VSAC works in one way or another towards this mission to serve all Vermonters, especially those for whom the doors of higher education have traditionally appeared closed. As was said earlier, I've had the privilege of working in the VSAC Outreach Department for 10 years. Our programs were created in 1969, designed to encourage and help Vermonters, particularly less advantaged Vermonters, pursue some form of education and training beyond high school. As all of you may know, likely know, serving this particular population, a pathway to security and ideally prosperity is fundamental. And education and training, whether it's certificate programs, associate's degree, bachelor's degree, and beyond, are challenging to achieve, but vital. Last year, pre-pandemic, VSAC outreach counselors worked with nearly 6,000 low-income or first-generation college-bound students through a series of 3 federal grants and 1 state grant. In outreach, we host a series of these grants. You may know a VSAC counselor in your community. Predominantly, these grants are the Gear Up grant, which I work for, the Talent Search grant, and the EOC grant. We have a team, specifically with the Talent Search and Gear Up program, we have a team of 21 middle and high school counselors spread out in over 80 schools across the state of Vermont. So our tiny state is well served. We augment and support these counseling services in those schools, all working with families, institutions, and we're also complemented by a team of 7 regional, correct me if I'm wrong, Susie, but 7 regional EOC counselors, like Susie and Marty, and a handful of other folks you may know. The Gear Up program, which I work for specifically, is for anyone in education or mental health or social services, right? It's an acronym, big surprise. But Gear Up is Gaining Early Awareness and Readiness for Undergraduate Program, and it's a U.S. Department of Ed funded grant. Through Gear Up, we serve 6th through 12th graders at about nearly 40 schools across the state. We also have a Talent Search program, which I'm a proud product of as a first-generation college graduate myself. The Talent Search program complements the Gear Up program and really helps us serve, as I said earlier, 80 schools. As many folks know, specific service to the foster youth demographic is nuanced. The intersection of poverty, instability, transience, homelessness, and all the other challenges make our work continuous and imperative. Each year, specifically our outreach counselor team is provided a list of DCF and foster youth identified students, which is filtered through our management team and disseminated to counselors on a regional level. Counselors like myself, I serve Winooski Middle, Winooski High, Colchester Middle, and Colchester High, but there's counselors all over the state. We interface with school staff and community to offer outreach and community and college and career planning services to this population. So some homework. If you don't know your outreach counselor, please make it a point to. On the slide below, you'll see a phone number you can call or a website you can visit. That's how you can get in touch with somebody in your region. Counselors offer personal, financial, academic planning and support from everything from a certificate like a commercial driver's license, a welding certificate, something in the trades, all the way through an associate's degree, which would be something perhaps achieved at the Community College of Vermont, one of our great partners, as well as bachelor's degree at some of our more traditional four-year institutions. Students who are in foster youth are automatically eligible for our services, but as you know, connecting the dots, getting students and resources connected can be challenging due to some of the insidious and complex challenges this population faces. Many folks want to know about money specifically. When they think about what we do at VSAC, they sort of their mind can kind of kick into like the finance piece, which is absolutely relevant and huge part of what we do. So we administer a really robust grant program and a really robust scholarship program. So many of you may have applied for grant funding yourselves, and you may have also applied for scholarships. We have specific scholarship programs designed to serve this demographic, but students are also so much more than this identity. So they are also welcome and encouraged to apply for other scholarships and other grant funding as well. I'm going to link you directly to our scholarships for students in foster care, which is right here in the chat. So two significant scholarships, the Vermont John H. Chafee and Training Scholarship, which is if you experience foster care, have recently graduated from high school, scholarship is for you. You must be under the age of 26, have financial need, have been in DCF custody after the age of 14. So this scholarship is ideally a renewable scholarship and from $1,000 to $3,000, not to exceed $5,000. I want to say Amanda was talking about independent status earlier and student loan debt. If the student you're supporting fills out their FAFSA, is Pell eligible, this would complement a Pell grant and could really make pursuing an education affordable. Higher education can be incredibly expensive, but with some careful planning and strategy, it doesn't need to be the enormous debt burden we all know can be a huge problem. There's also the Emily Lester Scholarship, which is listed below there. Students must attend an accredited school located within Vermont for eligible for Title IV funding, which pretty much means they're federally approved school. Most schools you would think of are. A school counselor can help you. And if you're wondering if they accept the FAFSA, they're probably an approved school. And students must be between 18 and 24 and be currently under custody. So those are two specific scholarships, but as I said, we also have just a really robust scholarship that I would encourage you, if you're supporting a student who's looking to pay for their education, I would encourage you to download our ebook and check it out. Criteria is really easy. There's over $5 million of scholarships awarded every year by VSAC, complemented by nearly $20 million grant program. So there is financial aid in the gift form available there specifically. Is there any questions in the chat that I may have missed? I don't want to just paste. Okay, we'll come back to the chat actually. Now, Amanda made some great references to our pathway resources as well. One thing I think that comes up for me is that many of the folks that I work with and interface with say, the FAFSA is terrifying. I don't know where to start. Well, good news. If you're supporting a student or if you care for a student who is a foster youth, we have live virtual counseling available, one-on-one help sessions available at VSAC. So we're kind of coming to you through Zoom this fall. In the past, this would have been more in person, but due to the nature of COVID-19, we're doing a lot of really awesome virtual programming, which we're hopeful is perhaps more accessible for folks. So I'm going to link you to our resources and our events page where you can register for help, either for attending a financial aid literacy presentation, but also one-on-one financial aid application help. So as many of you know, there's lots of forms to keep track of. So having kind of a coach available on Zoom, just like we are right now, to walk you or a foster youth student through that can be really helpful. And last but not least, per Amanda's awesome shout out, thank you, Amanda, for mentioning our Pathway for Foster Youth. The last link I'm going to share is the Pathway for Foster Youth. So college planning and financial literacy starts, one step at a time, like every other journey, but looking at what a student might want to do, how they're going to get there, and how they're going to pay for it are really three of the most important elements. this pathway sort of spells out how to navigate all three of those things, whether you're just sharing this with a student or whether you're holding their hand through the process. So I tried to be quick. I'll happy to accept any questions. Please take these resources and bookmark them on your webpage. And I look forward to maybe seeing some of you in person one day, and appreciate all that you're doing in your own lives to make the lives of other folks better. So thanks, Susie.
Thank you so much, Liam. That was really helpful. And so I guess tying a couple of pieces together that, Sarah shared a really nice example of a person who is connected with a number of resources and is working towards their education. I know that individual as well, and these two scholarships, Chafee and Lester, that Liam just highlighted, were really key pieces to help that student be successful. And one thing that presentations like this really remind me of is there is so much information, so much more than any of us could individually hold. And it often will take a team and this network of connections to really pull it all together for a student. And I think that is really the case here. I love hearing all of the examples of how it takes partnerships and this network of people to pull these pieces together. Chris, could you go to the next slide, please? So we have some time for questions, just a couple of minutes. I think there are a couple sitting in the chat there. Chris, do you see any that we might be able to do in the next minute or so?
Yeah, we'll give people a couple of minutes to see if they want to send any through the chat. A couple did come through. It does look like they were addressed, but possibly for the sake of sharing them with whoever may not be looking at the chat. Wondering if there's any resources for former foster youth who are now in permanency guardianship, and if there's any differences for foster youth on an interstate compact. There was an answer to that. Do you mind if I just go ahead and read what was in the chat?
That would be great.
All right, so it looks like, thanks to Amanda, there are some differences in resources depending on when you leave youth custody. Typically, if they leave after age 16, they're eligible for most or all resources. Independent student status applies for youth leaving care after the age of 13. Youth from other states are eligible for Vermont resources, but they do also work to determine if their state of origin can provide any support as well. And then in addition to that, we did have a question come through. I believe Liam was able to get to that, but someone wondered if there was specific financial support or scholarships for college or youth who were in the foster program and then adopted out. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe those may be the scholarships that were referenced just a few moments ago.
Yeah, I think that's the case. Liam, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Those are the two specific ones that we host. As far as other scholarships, here I'll link our web resource. Our scholarship page sort of links to larger national scholarship databases. So the College Board, FAFSA, and CAPEX are three great places to continue to look. And I want to say the Casey Foundation has some great resources available too. So check out some of the links on our scholarship page would be my recommendation.
Okay. So it's 11:01 already. An hour flies by quickly. Chris, could you just go to the next slide for us for a second? So I always like to highlight, we go through this material so quickly, it can be helpful to watch it again. We are archiving them on our YouTube page. So there is a link. We'll be sending out this PowerPoint and you can see this and other presentations. We have a couple of other great ones in the queue coming up. So next week, we'll be focusing on resources specifically for veterans. And then on October 13th, the next Zoom room then will be for healthcare pathways, really just focusing on all of the different options for people interested in healthcare and how to explore those options. And then next slide, please. And I think we just can't hit home enough of if in doubt, just call. If you call and you get the wrong person, we'll connect with you with the right one. Again, we'll be sending out this PowerPoint, so you will have the contact information for all the presenters if you'd like to follow up with them individually. Thank you all so much for joining us. In the next minute, again, if you have questions that weren't asked or answered, you can pop them in the chat there, or you can send them to us as a follow-up and we can try to get those answers for you. So thank you again to our panel. Thank you all for joining us. And it was great to have you all with us today.